Hey guys, welcome back to EF Live. This is actually episode 4 of our new webinar series hosted here on Empire Flippers. And I'm your host, Jake Davis, and I'll be coming at you every single week. Before I get into explaining, for those of you who are new, as to who I am, what my story is, and how I got going with Empire Flippers, let me introduce Alex. Alex Champagne. How are you doing?
I am doing well, man. Doing well. How about
I
you?
I'm doing really well. Today's been a bit of a morning, as uh, you know. The only issue is that my poster there was fallen, but we fixed it. Today's going really well. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be with me today. This is going to be really fun. We have an exciting topic, which I hope everyone really enjoys. So the goal of our show here at EF Live is to cover topics that can help you get started with your own online business, or to help give you some of the information required when selling your online business. And the first 4 episodes, and if you missed them, you can go back and check out the first 3. The first 4 episodes were in an Amazon FBA series. So this is episode 4, and we're going to be talking about maximizing your FBA business, what you should do to, we're kind of talking about the selling of your Amazon FBA business. We're going to be talking about what goes into valuing the business. We're going to be talking about what you can do to raise that value, what you should do to maximize your business. And it's going to be a really, really good episode. And so a little bit on me. So I've been with Empire Flippers now for about 9-ish months. And if you've listened to any of the seller interviews, you'll have heard my voice. So here is the face to what I can only hope all of you have thought is a beautiful voice. So, so we got. I am soon to be graduated electrical engineering student, and will. I'll be graduating electrical engineering from the University of Central Florida, and I got started with Empire Flippers doing the seller interviews last July. Things I also do, I like video games. I'm engaged, so I like movie nights, going on walks, with my fiance. I, do speed running. For video games, I play Legend of Zelda. That's a little bit about me, Alex. What do you got going on?
Yeah. So I am the director of sales here at Empire Flippers. I've been with EF going over close to a year and a half now. We've seen some crazy growth during my time here, and basically my role is to help us, sell more businesses and kind of make sure that the experience is great for people who are coming in to sell and people who are coming in to buy. A little bit about my background before EF. So I started a digital marketing and web design company focused on conversion rate optimization about 6 years ago. During that time, I also got to work on some side projects. Kind of what you guys would care about here is I do have some FBA experience. So I actually launched an FBA business in the supplement space. We grew that up, and then I exited it to my partner. So I'm pretty intimately familiar with FBA, how it works. And the other big thing here is we sell a ton of FBA
Mm-hmm.
businesses. So I get to learn from our sellers on their best tactics and what they do to kind of optimize their business, and also what buyers are looking for. So hopefully we can really get a solid understanding of what the market looks like, and kind of help you guys understand, if you're thinking about selling, what you need to do to really maximize that value, and understand the timeline and those kind of things.
Yeah, so if we're talking about the, selling your business and everything, I mean, Alex is really the guy to talk to in Empire Flippers. As he said, he's the director of sales, and he, has been able to learn a lot about, the going-ons of FBA businesses. So today, again, we're going to be talking about maximizing your FBA business. Before we get to that, though, hold on. I want to go ahead and shout out everyone who is currently watching. Thank you guys for joining. We got Doug Hutchins, Patricia Lemons from South Texas. Doug is from Asheville, North Carolina. We've got Imtiaz Ahmed, and we got Steven. Anyone else I did not catch? Thank you for joining. I really appreciate you being here. This is gonna be fun. I hope that this information is useful to you, and in the spirit of making sure that this information is useful to you, we are going to be having a Q&A afterward. So if there are any questions that you have, feel free to post them in the chat on YouTube and on Facebook. I got to pull that one up. It closed on me. But Facebook, YouTube, ask your questions. We want to get to them because we really want this to be a show that helps you. So,
Absolutely.
Alex, do you have anything else you wanna touch on before we dive right in?
I don't think so. I'm from Houston, so the person from South Texas got a kindred spirit already. Info is going to be even more helpful.
Yes, yes. Obviously, we that space. If there's anyone in Florida, anyone in Orlando, yo, this is the webinar for you.
This is the South.
Um,
The
yeah, the
webinar from
webinar
the
from the
South.
south of the U.S. So we'll be coming at you live every Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern time. I'll be on, and I'll have a different Empire Flippers team member on with me to, get the best information that we can for you because this is a show that is for you guys. So let's go ahead and dive into what is our content for today, and that is again maximizing an FBA business. So I'll go ahead and let you introduce first actually what I want to talk about is the key points that we're going to be talking about. So the key points that we're going to be talking about today are how FBA businesses are valued, how to maximize the value of an FBA business, and the process for selling an FBA business. So Alex, can you go ahead and walk through how FBA businesses are valued? There are three key points, three things that
Yep.
you look at, and let's start with the first one.
Yeah, sure. So we do use a formula to help us determine where we value businesses. So what that formula is built around is three key things. So the first one is monthly net profit. The next one is a monthly multiple. And the last thing is we're also going to add in inventory at cost in relation to an FBA business. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the biggest kind of decider or deciding factor for what is going to make your business sellable and at what level it's going to sell is the monthly net profit. So what we're doing here is we're looking to determine an average monthly net profit. So ideally, if you're looking for kind of the best valuation, we want to use a 12-month trailing average. So let's say it's March right now. We would go back all the way to March of last year, and we would determine what the average net profit was over those 12 months, and then we would use that as basically the factor here in the algorithm. I'm forgetting the word for what that's called right now. But anyway, so yeah, but there are unique situations where we want to use a different time frame other than 12 months. So in that case, you might be having a business that, let's say you started a year and a half ago. A lot of time with FBA, it's going to take a lot of time to get any type of traction or success going. So maybe for the first, let's say 9 months, you were testing different products, you were making sure everything was good to go, working with different suppliers, making sure that your product was quality. And then over the last 9 months, you've had dramatically different results than the previous 3 months. So maybe the first 3 months you were earning an average of $1,000, but the last 9 months, the average is around $4,000. Well, that's a drastically different business, and we don't think it's reflective to take that 12-month average. So in that case, we would use that 9-month trailing average. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, and I guess a question that I have is, are there ever any times when the average that you take isn't reflective of, like, is there any concern with someone looking at buying a business on Empire Flippers? If the numbers do change drastically, is there a chance that if the numbers changed, so you took a 6-month average, and then, what if the numbers drop again? What if the 6-month spike was an anomaly?
Was the
Yeah.
seasonality? Yeah, so we always try to price that in, and that's something you want to keep in mind with a younger business. So if we only have 12 months of history for an FBA, it can be difficult to predict where the future is going to go. But typically, if a business is 3 years old, you have a pretty good indication of where it should be performing based on previous earnings. So that's something you always want to kind of keep in mind. A little bit more about the average net profit, just to quickly touch on how we determine that. what that bottom line number comes to is not going to include anything you're paying your salary. It's basically what the new buyer would need in order to run the business and get the same results that you're currently experiencing. So if you're spending a lot of money on something that really isn't fundamental to the business, our vetting and valuation team would talk with you about that, and we might actually remove that and add that profit back in. So keep that in mind. Does that kind of make sense on how we're
Yeah, no,
spending
that
money?
that definitely makes sense. And so, what are some of the other things that you should be mindful of when talking about this?
About your monthly
Yeah.
net profit? Yeah, so I mean, as far as like we were talking about, ultimately this is going to be one of the biggest indicators for where your business gets valued. So if you're looking to improve the valuation, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, kind of the most obvious way is to make more
Hmm.
money, right? So if your business makes more money, it's going to sell for more money. But I think the big thing here is stability is a really good thing to see for monthly net profit. Sometimes people will actually see they'll focus their efforts on, instead of focusing on overall revenue growth, they'll focus on optimizing their monthly net profit, which is something buyers like to see as well. So you may have been earning $20,000 in revenue but only making $5,000 in net profit, whereas maybe 3 months down the line you're now making $17,000 but the same amount of monthly net profit. So that's still fine. It just means that you're optimizing and you're trying to focus in a
Hmm.
different direction. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
So now moving on, if you look at the equation there for
Mm-hmm.
the valuation, we have the three main parts there. We have monthly net profit, we have the multiple, and now also inventory at cost. So let's move on to the multiple. As you know, Alex, when
Yeah.
talking about the multiple that you have for the business, sometimes it's different. What goes into choosing that?
Sure. So at Empire Flippers, we use a monthly net profit multiple. So a lot of brokerages you'll see you'll use an annual one. We like to use a monthly net profit multiple because it gives us more of a honed down, very
Hmm.
precise understanding of where we're building this off of. So our multiple range varies anywhere between 20 to 40x. There are some outliers on that high end of the multiple, but they're extremely rare. But for the most part, you're working within those 20 different months. So the things that go into this are things like the age of the business. So again, an older business that's over 3 years has a lot more earnings history and is going to tend to perform more stable than a business that is a
Hmm.
year old. Again, these are all kind of stereotypes for specific businesses, but it's something that really kind of, when you get to scale, it's true across the board. The next thing is work required. So a lot of the times, especially if we're looking at businesses under that 300,000, under that $200,000 price point, buyers aren't looking to acquire a business that's a full-time job. So if you're spending 40 to 60 hours a week, you're going to inevitably have a smaller buyer pool, and ultimately buyers are going to place a lower value on that business as opposed to where you're spending
Hmm.
3 hours a week. And it doesn't mean that the business where you're spending more time is a bad business. It's just a less valuable business in terms of an investment, because there is a lot of time required and work required to make sure it continues to perform.
Yeah, so it's really a
Uh,
case by case basis. Hmm.
It really is. And what might get frustrating for you guys on this is basically a lot of these answers are going to be it's case by case and really depends on your business. But the good news is we have a process where we can help get
Hmm.
those questions answered for you, and we can kind of talk about that later. But yeah, and then the other thing here is risk and growth potential. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this later on. But basically, a general kind of fact is you always want to mitigate risk when possible, because that's what buyers really like. So we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that later, like I said, but just keep that in mind. That does help
Hmm.
determine the multiple there.
I just on this point, something that's worth
Hmm.
considering is, when you think of, at least here in the United States, I don't know how prominent it is outside of the US, it's a TV show, but when you think about buying and selling businesses and, evaluating businesses, something I think of is Shark Tank. And Shark
Hmm.
Tank, for those of you who don't know, it's a TV show here in the US. There are some very successful, wealthy entrepreneurs who, sit there and hear people come and pitch their businesses to them and decide if they want to purchase some equity, become a partner, and help them grow that business. So the reason I bring that up is when they talk about evaluating businesses, they always go off of an annual, the prior year in sales. How much money did
Hmm.
the business make in the previous year? And something that is concerning with that is there are businesses where they will make nothing. They will make less than $1,000, which I mean isn't nothing, but less than $1,000 over the 11 months, and then you hit December and they could make $120,000. I've seen that from
Yeah.
businesses, um, that I've done seller interviews with. So I guess my question to you, Alex, is why? What are the benefits of looking at it from an annual standpoint?
The benefits of looking at it, so basically taking into a longer time frame,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that what
So
you're saying?
why base it off of a 12-month annual? Why look at the annual sales rather than the monthly?
Yeah, so I mean, basically, the longer history that you have from a business, the better understanding or indicator of how that business is going to
Mm-hmm.
perform. So you're going to be able to see seasonality trends that may not be apparent if you were focusing more on like a 3 month window or a 6 month window. Another thing to keep in mind is almost every FBA business, I say every, 80% of FBA businesses are going to have very strong
Mm-hmm.
Q4s. So, if we're just pricing in the last 6 months and 3 months of that is Q4, it's not reflective of what the next 6 months are going to make for
Mm-hmm.
the business. So it's giving an inaccurate kind of valuation for the business. And the other thing to keep in mind here, guys, is we're trying to do our best so that we can have a conversation with a buyer that comes from a place of like, this is why this business is priced at this perspective, and this is why we're not going to play this game of you make an offer at 30% of net pro or of the list price, and then we kind of go back and forth. So on the average, our listings sell within 90% of list price. And I think that's a big testament to the fact that we're valuing these businesses
Mm-hmm.
accurate, and it's because we are using this equation and this formula and all of our experience to come up with exactly where that business needs to be
Yeah, and
priced.
speaking of, speaking to that experience and everything, let's go ahead and run through a
Mm-hmm.
couple examples for some previously listed and evaluated businesses,
Yeah,
and we'll go
yeah,
ahead and just talk about what went into deciding those numbers. So, if
yeah,
we jump here to this example, this is a 22 times multiplier. What went into that decision?
yeah. So that's obviously if we're looking from an annual perspective, right under 2 years, and it's got a $500,000 sales price. The things that are built into this is it's 22,800 per month, so 22,800 monthly net profit. It's only 12 months old, and we're using a shorter time frame here, so a 6 month average net profit window. It's only single product, so that's another thing that's going to be a factor. So the more you can diversify revenue across multiple channels or multiple SKUs, the greater that multiple is going to be. Because again, think from a buyer's perspective, they're trying to mitigate that risk and have a more stable business. So if something were to drop off, the other products in the business would be able to carry the
Mm-hmm.
business a little bit. So one traffic channel, again, kind of what we talked about. This would be a solely on FBA business. It's not selling on any other marketplaces or on their own store or any e-coms, but it does have 5 new products ready to launch. So, and again, we'll talk a little bit about that potential and opportunity there. But we're not going to make that a major factor into the valuation because it's ultimately untested, and at the kind of it's just
Mm-hmm.
potential at this point. So that's what goes into this business. Let's compare that to the
Yeah,
next one. Uh, so the next business here is a
34.
34x multiple. Yeah, so getting close to 3 years, $1.7 million sales price, and these are real examples, by the way, guys. So these are businesses that have actually sold. So the sales price was 1.7 million, 50,700 in monthly net profit. It's 25 months old, so it's nearly 2 times as old as the other business. We're able to see those seasonality trends based over year. We're able to see growth, that kind of thing, and we're able to use a longer average monthly net profit window here. So we're using a 12-month average for this business. It has 3 traffic channels, which is great from a risk diversity perspective. Even if 60% of the business is still coming from FBA, that 40% diversity is awesome because there's already a platform in place where you can kind of put capital in, get some growth opportunities, that kind of thing, and it really diversifies the risk. And the last thing is virtual assistants included. What's great about this is, like we talked about, he's limiting the number of hours that the owner actually has to work on the business, and it's going to make it a much easier takeover and ideally, a smoother takeover for a new buyer. Does that make
Yeah,
sense,
no,
Jake?
that definitely makes sense. So, in your experience, do buyers like having that virtual assistant? Do they like seeing that? Would they rather see I don't have to pay someone, but I have to put in 5 hours a week? Or would they rather see, okay, so I'm going to cut my profit down by 20%, but I will put in 20 minutes a month?
Sure. So I think it always depends on the numbers. If you have a business that's generating like $1,000 a month, it can be difficult to find a virtual assistant to make sense of the
Mm-hmm.
numbers. But if your business is doing north of $3,000, $4,000 even, and you do see a drop in the net profit because you've implemented a virtual assistant, from a buyer's perspective, if they are the type that wants to take on that workload and eliminate that cost, they have
Mm-hmm.
that option. But almost always a buyer is going to want a situation where the virtual assistant is there because it just makes the situation easier, and they have the choice ultimately whether to keep them on or move them off. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
yeah,
I'd say
sorry to cut you off. No, I was
go
just
ahead.
gonna say, and we're gonna touch on this a little bit more later, but one potential risk with an Amazon FBA business is, and as Alex was saying, diversifying. Having more than one traffic source, and so we'll touch on that a little bit more later. But that is something to keep in mind, that putting all your eggs in one basket. And while Amazon is a powerhouse, Amazon is what, like the second wealthiest company in the world. I know it's in top five. It's probably not going
Yeah,
anywhere, and the Amazon FBA platform is growing. So it's a very, it's a pretty safe bet. But if you are in playing on someone else's court, so it is just worth mentioning, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. So
yeah, we'll talk more about
yeah,
that.
so
Okay.
now let's move on to the final section in that valuation equation. How do you handle the inventory?
Yeah, absolutely. So keep this in mind, guys. If you're looking at businesses on our marketplace, that does not include the inventory in the
Mm-hmm.
sales price. So this is purchased additionally at landed cost at time of transfer. So what landed cost means is basically how much it costs to get the inventory wherever it is. So typically it's going to be measured by how much it's going to cost to get into the FBA warehouse. So there's going to be the actual cost from the supplier, the shipping from the supplier to maybe a third party logistics provider, and then maybe the 3PL is plus the stickering cost that gets added on, and then it's in Amazon. There's some additional fees there. So all of those costs blended together is what you're going to determine the actual cost. And basically, we're just trying to pay the seller back for what he has already put into
Mm-hmm.
the inventory. And then a couple things to keep in mind with inventory. So, if you're thinking about selling your business, a reasonable level of inventory makes sense. So, you shouldn't have a $50,000 FBA business and $100,000 worth of inventory. That probably means that you've either purchased too much, maybe you purchased in volume, but it's a very big commitment for a buyer to take over a business that may take 2 years to sell off its inventory. So if possible, you want to have usually anywhere between 30 to 50% of your sales price in inventory cost. It depends on the business, but that's kind of a general rough rule. It depends on also when it is in the year. So if you're prepping for Chinese New Year and you know the factory is going to be shut down, so you place a larger order, that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense that you're going to have a higher percentage of inventory to sales price. But if you're in like the middle of the year, it's not your hot season, there's no issues with supplier, having inventory around 20% of sales price, I think makes a lot of sense. And then the next thing is no dead inventory. So this is an example of like you just want to do what makes sense for everyone involved. So no buyer is going to want to buy inventory that isn't selling. So even if it's selling 3 or 4 units a month or 20 units a month, but you have 1,000 of them, you're probably not going to be able to find a buyer to take that over, and you may have to just have that as a sunk cost or just sell it off and try to get what you can out of it. But that's usually not going to want to get acquired by a buyer.
Yeah, and we have that listed there. Can you tell the viewers what they can expect if they go to empireflippers.com/valuation tool?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've our marketing team's done a really good job of building out this really helpful tool to basically give you a really good understanding of what your business would be worth as it currently stands. So if you put your numbers in accurately based on all the questions that it asks, it'll spit out a range of what your business should be worth. So if you guys are even interested in that at all, I would definitely check that
Mm-hmm.
out, find out what your business is worth, and it also kind of makes you come from the perspective that knowing that you have a solid grasp on your
Mm-hmm.
numbers too. Because if you can't answer the questions on there, it means you might have a bigger issue and really need to dig in and get a better understanding of the numbers on your business.
Yeah, so that's pretty much what goes into, or I mean, that not pretty much, that is what goes into valuing a business when you get listed on Empire Flippers. So if you have any questions on that, remember we're doing a Q&A after. So if you want any more clarification on the valuation side of things, feel free, post them in YouTube chat, and I would say Facebook, but it doesn't seem to be connected. So we'll
Hmm.
have to, if you post them in YouTube chat, and we'll definitely get to as many questions as we can. So let's move on though to our next topic, and that is maximizing the value of an FBA business. So I guess before we dive into this, something that I just want to stress is that we see a lot of FBA businesses come through Empire Flippers, and so we see a lot of really awesome things done with these Amazon FBA businesses. But something that I've noticed with doing seller interviews is there are also times when um, there are future opportunities for growth, and that can be a selling point for a new buyer. But that, as a seller, that can also be something to keep in mind as to entice a buyer. Here are some things I can do. So let's go ahead and dive on into this with just some ideas that we have, some tips that we have to maximize your business. So, yeah,
Yeah.
so we'll just run through this list and then we'll talk about them. So, the first thing that we have on our list here is separate company. So, what do why do you feel like they should have a separate company?
Yeah, so this just makes the process so much easier from a valuation perspective, from a sales perspective. So, especially as you start creeping up in the larger businesses, north of 300, $500,000, people really want a detailed view of, exactly what your business is doing in terms of performance. So, having a separate company makes that a lot easier. You're not having blended expenses, you're not having blended income that we're trying to like differentiate and pull out. Keep in mind, we can do that. It just makes the process a lot more difficult and a lot more time consuming. And when we do get to that part where we're looking to make sure that all the information is good to go, having the separate companies just makes it a much easier process. So that one's pretty easy to do and can be implemented at any
And
time.
then we have detailed financials. And we kind of touched on this a little bit before, but can you go into a little more detail on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've done webinars with the guys from Fetcher and Jungle Scout and a couple other people. And one of the big things, one of the big issues we see with FBA sellers is they really don't have a solid grasp on what their numbers are. And for the most part, it's not the seller's fault. It can be difficult to pull information out of a seller central. So making sure you're taking the time, even though it's going to take a good bit of time to track your numbers, make sure you understand your expenses, understand your costs, understand your advertising, understand where your money's coming in and where it's going out, and getting that into either a simple profit and loss statement or using one of those tools out there to kind of help you get this in order. It can be super helpful because when you do go to sell, if you haven't done it for like a year, it's just going to again really slow that process down. It's going to get muddled, and it's going to take a lot of time to get clarity around those. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I just want to say that if you are, that's kind of an ocean of a topic in and of itself. And so our
absolutely.
episode last week, EF Live 3, again, this is the fourth episode in our new series. So episode 3, we were actually diving deep into preparing those documents for your Amazon FBA business. We talked about profit and loss statements and everything like that, and we covered. There are different options that you can have. You can do it yourself. You can hire an accountant. You can kind of go somewhere in the middle, and there are these tools. There are these software tools that can kind of help you do it, but you're still getting a good grasp of it yourself. And there are pros and cons to each solution, and we covered that all last
Mhm.
week. So yeah, if that's something that you are concerned with, definitely go ahead and check out that episode. So let's move on to our next point here, which is the work required. Now, obviously, when
Sure.
talking about the work that goes, or what a business is worth, I mean, what it's worth is relative. What it's worth is everyone can have a different opinion of what something is worth. But something that everyone can agree on is less work required for the same amount of money is obviously preferable. Well, do you
Absolutely.
feel like, going back to my question earlier, if someone is looking at their business, is it worth spending the money to hire a VA to take over some stuff to minimize that work required by the owner before sale?
Yeah, I mean, the good news here is any FBA that's established, it kind of has its products in place. It's got its brand. It's kind of building. Um, the owner doesn't have to spend a ton of hours on the business. So 5 to 10 hours is pretty
Mm-hmm.
typical. If the business gets much larger, that time can start getting sucked into customer service, those kind of things. So if you're in that range, guys, of spending 5 to 10 hours a week on the business, it's probably not worth bringing in a VA because it also could be tasks that might be difficult to teach to a virtual assistant as compared to handling customer support
Hmm.
inquiries, those kind of things that can be templated and processed. So that's something we're going to talk a little bit later here. But yeah, I mean, if the opportunity does exist to reduce the work required, go ahead and do it. But in the case of an FBA, as compared to like an e-com or something that may be a little more complex to run, or a SaaS business, Amazon handles so
Hmm.
much of it for you. So you're kind of already in a good spot. But if you are to that point where you're seeing yourself spend, north of 25 hours, it typically means your business is pretty large or it's really early. So if it's really early, you need to get to the point where the business is earning and continuing to perform before you kind of get to that sales point. But if your business is larger, it makes sense to bring a VA on, but you're kind of resisting because you just don't want to spend a bunch of time on training them. It really is worth it, guys, because it's going to make it a much more attractive asset for
Yeah,
buyers.
and that topic right there with work required is it kind of encompasses some of the other points that we want to touch on too, and that is, one of them, if you have the people and processes in place, if you have people hired to help you run the business, if you have detailed descriptions of what goes on in the day to day, that can really just help the transition, make it go smooth, make the new owner feel like this will be an easy takeover. What you don't want is to have a new owner be looking at this and think, okay, well, I like the numbers, I like the business idea, but I can't take it over because it's too complicated for me to run.
Yeah.
And also, we have no touching inventory. Something that's good about Amazon FBA is that the fulfillment is done by Amazon. And so, but with that said, there are cases where some owners like to have a little bit of they like to handle the inventory a little bit themselves, especially as you were talking about, especially starting out. So
Hmm.
when you get that process to where you go straight from the supplier to the Amazon warehouses, that can again just minimize that work required.
Absolutely. Yeah, and something to keep in mind, I think we've covered basically everything on here, guys, is whenever you're doing these things, you're also, even if you don't decide to sell, you've made a much better business for yourselves. So like you've given yourself more visibility into the performance of your business. You've put processes and systems in place so when then something does come up, you have a system that's going to let you handle it effectively and
Mm-hmm.
efficiently. So always coming from the perspective of that, I'm planning on selling this business, even if you don't, is going to
Mm-hmm.
make a better
Yeah.
business.
So now let's talk about valuing on potential versus growth trend.
Yeah, so this is something that we really want to make clear when we're talking with buyers and potential sellers. So it can be very difficult to price in
Mm-hmm.
potential or price on potential, and so we don't do it. And the reason we don't do it is because we don't know if that's inevitably going to lead to revenue. So if you have this awesome opportunity to go into 20 different verticals or 20 different marketplaces, but the fact of the matter is you haven't done it and the it hasn't become a reality, like you were talking about, placing a value on that becomes radically different depending on
Mm-hmm.
who the person is that's trying to acquire the asset. So where one person might say, I'd pay a ton of money for that because I already understand how this works, that kind of thing. Where the other person, and the vast majority, are gonna be like, that's great, maybe I can pull that off, but you haven't been able to pull
Mm-hmm.
it off yet. So, why should I pay additional money for
Yes.
this? So instead, what we do is we base that off of growth trend. So if the business is performing well, like month over month growth, we can see an increase in that multiple because that shows that it
Yeah.
still looks good. We're all good. It shows that it's going to continue to slide upward if all things were to stay the same. So just keep that in mind, guys. When we're having these conversations, it's not because we don't think that your business doesn't have opportunity or potential. It's just that it can be incredibly difficult to place a value number on it. And so what we use instead is we explain that to the buyer, and that'll help us get closer to list price, but we're not going to add additional kind
Mm-hmm.
of multiples to that.
Yeah, and so I just wanna. I'm actually outside of my normal office. My home has no power, which is why I'm in kind of a temporary situation, and my backdrop fell. So I apologize about that. But we're just gonna obviously keep rolling. Doesn't matter, things happen. So
It's
yeah,
live.
it's EF Live, guys. You're getting a look into what really goes on with Empire Flippers. So
Yeah, the TV might fall if we give it
oh
enough
man,
time.
that would
So
be
we'll be
tragic,
good.
especially because you're in an office that you rent.
That's true.
That'd be not a good thing if that were to fall on your watch. So so you're totally right though. someone could look at and think this looks great. Someone else could look and think, I don't see it. So at the end of the
Yep.
day, it comes down to getting the best evaluation for the best business and hoping that someone comes around and you connect the right buyer with the right business. And in the spirit of connecting the right buyer with the right business, now we have to sell the business. So the
hmm
selling process, director of sales here, let's talk about the process for selling an FBA business.
Yeah, so the first step is going to be to use the valuation tool. So, I mean, if you haven't done that yet and you do have a business you're considering selling, there's absolutely no obligation. It's going to give you some helpful information, so go ahead and do that. The next stage of the process, as far as working with us, is so we're a fully vetted marketplace. So, in order to sell on Empire Flippers, you would need to go through vetting and valuation. And we'll talk a little bit more about vetting there, but just from an initial perspective, going ahead and using the valuation tool is a great step. And then after you get that number, really it's when you want to have a conversation with yourself on whether you want to sell now or sell later. So what's kind of cool about us is we have so much deal flow that we don't have this, we're not in this position where we're incentivized to kind of like push people into selling early or kind of like making it happen. So ultimately, if your business sells for more, we're going to make more money. So we want to make sure that we're giving you the exit strategy that's going to make the most sense for you. So ultimately, that's a decision for yourselves. The valuation tool will give you some feedback on whether it would help if your business was older, that kind of thing. And if you have questions, we'll send you a link after you fill out that valuation tool. You can schedule a time to talk with a business analyst, and they'll kind of walk you through what to expect and everything around that. But let's say you have made the decision, like, look, this sounds awesome. I would love to make that amount of money for my business. What do I need to prepare? Again, this is kind of a cool thing about us is we help manage a lot of this for you. And since you're on FBA, the information already exists. So if you're not keeping fantastic books, the good news is Seller Central has the information. So we'll work with you to prepare your profit and loss statement, make sure we have a solid understanding of your expenses, your landed costs, those kind of things for inventory. And all of that will happen in the vetting process. So vetting takes typically 2 to 4 weeks. And during that time, we'll work with you to make sure all your information is accurate, make sure we have an accurate profit and loss statement, which is huge, get confirmation of revenue and screenshots of that so that we can prepare your listing so that when it does go live, our buyers have the information they need to make an educated decision. But the other big thing is buyers are willing to pay a premium for our businesses because they have been vetted and they know that the information they're operating on is good. So after the vetting process, you go live on the marketplace. We have a dedicated sales team. We actually have the largest team in the online brokerage industry, just working to get your business sold. But the other thing is we're going to make sure that you're only talking to people that are serious. So we have a pretty cool process about that. And I'm sure we'll go into that in a later webinar. But let's say we do get an offer on your business. And keep in mind, last year, on average, we sold an FBA business every 10 days. And we're getting better and better at that. So we sell a lot of FBA. So getting to the negotiation perspective, we'll be there every step of the way, making sure you understand the deal, making sure that we're getting a deal that makes sense for you and explaining what we need to do during that stage. And then after that, another fantastic opportunity about working with us is we do have a managed migration. So we'll actually work with you and the buyer to transfer the asset over. Our migration team will be there helping coach, helping guide, helping transfer when applicable, and making sure that the process goes smoothly. And this is another reason that buyers are willing to pay a premium to work with us because they know they're going to get an asset that makes sense. And that makes sense for you as a seller as well because you have a good business. So us helping you transfer that business over and make sure things go smoothly there just makes sense. And then at the end of that period is when we'll pay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And that raises a question. And speaking of questions, guys, make sure any questions you do have, we will be doing Q&A at the end of this. So anything you do have that you want to know, whether it be about this topic or not, like whether it could be about us, hey, Jake, you said that you live in Orlando, like, I could potentially be moving to Orlando. Do you like the area? Like any questions you have, we really want this to be your webinar. So
yeah, like what brand of tape did you use?
yeah,
To
what
hold
brand
that
of
up?
tape did you
Because
use to
we can
hold up that
avoid
poster? Because I clearly do not want that brand of tape. No, the bigger issue, Alex, is that this is a monstrously large poster. And so, like I said, I'm in a temporary location for this week. And so,
Absolutely, man. I know you're just making the
yeah.
best.
No,
I'm just
no, I
messing
know.
with
I
you.
just,
So
I feel, man, I was really hoping because we did our 30 minutes of our pre-call before we went live, and it stayed up that whole time. It
it
was
was
all
all
good,
good.
it's
Yeah.
just disappointing. But anyway, so speaking of broker or do it yourself, I mean, I guess that really begs the question. I mean, like you said, you are paying a bit of a premium to use Empire Flipper services,
Absolutely.
and being an Empire Flippers team member, I know the atmosphere at Empire Flippers. I know the culture. I know that
Hmm.
everyone on the team is very helpful, very eager to help you. But that being said, it might not be for everyone. Can you go through the pros and cons of using a broker like Empire Flippers or doing it yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can talk a little bit about pros and cons. And so let's talk first about the pros of a private sale. So you selling it yourself. So obviously the biggest pro here is you get to keep the full sales price. So you're not paying anyone any money of the sales price. But there's a lot of kind of things that come along with that. So one, in order to sell a business, and we will always kind of talk with people and we'll say if you have any strategic acquisition partners that may be an opportunity, you should reach
Mm-hmm.
out to them first, because those are the people that are going to be willing to pay more than market price, because if they were to take your asset on, they already have the systems in place to kind of leverage it and take it to the next level. So let's say you have done that, it didn't pan out, or you just don't want to go that route. One of the things you're going to have to keep in mind, even if you do that, is you're going to be opening up your books to potential competitors. So you're going to be showing insider information to someone who could theoretically leverage that information and not end up buying your business. So keep that in mind. And the next thing is it's going to be much harder to qualify serious buyers, and it can lead to a lot of wasted times. So you may be able to post it somewhere, like another marketplace, and you're getting a ton of traction. You're getting a bunch of people asking questions, but ultimately you don't know if they have any money. You have no real experience on setting up a system where you're assuring that you're going to get paid instead of just wasting your time and kind of educating for free. The other thing is your negotiation skills and where you're pricing your business probably are lacking. So, I mean, we sold 210 businesses last year. We're always looking to improve, but we're getting pretty good at valuing these businesses, and we're always listening to the market and kind of have our pulse on it. Whereas someone who has never sold a business before, you may be kind of making an estimate on, what you think your business is worth, but you don't really have the information you need to kind of um, come up with an accurate
Mm-hmm.
valuation. And then on top of that, once you do get into those negotiations, if it's your first business, there's going to be a lot of emotions involved, and you could leave a lot of money on the table. So does that kind of make sense on what the pros and cons are from a private sale perspective?
Totally. And I mean, again, it's all relative. It's all relative.
Absolutely.
I'm sure there are plenty of people who are doing these businesses, and it could even be their first one, and they are very
Hmm.
suited to sell their own business. But we just want to cover some of the pros and cons of for generally, and I
Yeah.
guess we'll definitely walk through the brokerage pros and cons too. But I mean, actually, you go through that, and then I'll give my takeaway.
Okay. So, I mean, and the big thing with the brokerage is keep in mind, typically you're going to get a better sales price. So, we have a massive audience of people looking to acquire these assets. We also know how to position the asset, and we also have, systems around that help us to make the transfer and the transition successful. So, we're going to help guide you through negotiations in possible earnout scenarios. So, if you're selling a business north of $100,000, it's typical the buyer is going to want to have some sort of seller financing, and we actually have a team that helps manage that and manage the earnout for you, so that we make sure you get paid and that everything's good to go there. And we talked a little bit about this, but better buyer reach, and we're having an ability to qualify the people who you're talking with. So, in order to even view the information on Empire Flippers, people have to put down a 5% refundable deposit just to even have access to your information. On top of that, we have a ton of previous buyers who are repeat buyers and who are looking to purchase businesses. We can sell businesses extremely quickly and make sure that your time is being managed effectively. Um, the other thing is we can help mitigate the risk of competitors just taking a peek. And like we talked about, that refundable deposit process helps that. They may not even know your business is for sale because the URL isn't public. There's no real way to know it is your business, and unless they kind of dove in and came from a perspective of like this business makes sense for me to potentially acquire. Now let's talk about that final step, which is the migration. This is pretty unique, but we have, like you said, that dedicated migration team that's going to help transfer the asset over and make sure that everything is going smoothly, and that the buyer can rest assured that they're getting a business that is continuing to perform. So buyers are willing to pay for that and make sure um, that that process is in place. So the obviously the con with a brokerage is you're going to pay a commission to the broker. Ours is 15% up to $1 million, but from a net perspective, like we mentioned here, typically you're going to get a higher sales price. So usually all things are going to balance out, and from a kind of a 30,000 foot view, you're actually going to make more money from a takeaway perspective than trying to sell it on your own for the
Yeah,
most
and
part.
I mean, I guess it's the obvious con of using a broker is that you have to pay the broker. Um, but I mean, at the end of the day, everyone, I mean, you gotta pick your strong suits, and if selling a business and doing all of the research and work in valuing and finding the right buyers and making sure that you don't just expose yourself to competitors, if that's your strong suit, then by all means go for it. But
Hmm.
typically, if you want to sell a business, you know, you're good at building the business, and those are the obvious cons. So you're gonna have to pay the fee, but you'll get more expertise. You'll get a team of
Absolutely.
people who are good at valuing, who are good at vetting, who are good at finding the right people to make that deposit, who are good at framing the proper content when putting out the advertising about the listing. I mean, all of that. It's expertise versus money at the end of the day. So, speaking of listings on Empire Flippers, let's go ahead and talk about a listing that we have here on Empire Flippers. And so, the purpose of this is we just kind of want to go through an example listing on Empire Flippers. If you think it looks good, obviously you can click over, but we really just want to highlight some of the cool things that we see about FBA businesses. So this is listing 44276 on Empire Flippers, empireflippers.com/listing/44276, and you can get more information about this. Is an Amazon FBA business in the arts and crafts niche, and you can see the numbers there. Basically, about $24,000 in monthly revenue, 4,500 in profit, and again,
Hmm.
that is built on the average. And we talked about averages earlier in the show. This one is based off of a 12-month average. And something that I just really want to touch on quickly about a business like this is that going back to what we were talking about before about putting all your eggs in one basket, this is a business that what they do on Amazon, they do well. They rank high
Hmm.
for the keywords. They, you know, get a lot of response on their pay-per-click ads on Amazon, but outside of Amazon, they don't have much experience. So if you're looking at this as a potential buyer, you could think, oh, I am really good at setting up a Shopify site and running Facebook ads and AdSense and getting all of that information out there to people to come to my website. Then this may be a business for you. But as a business owner yourself, if you are looking at maximizing your FBA business, I mean, you know, maybe diversifying. What do you think when you look at this, Alex?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind is you're always playing in someone's
Mm-hmm.
sandbox, right? So, let's say you have an affiliate site. It's going to be primarily driving traffic through search engine optimization. So you're playing within Google's sandbox in that instance, right? If Google makes adjustment, it's going to have an adjustment towards your site. Same thing kind of goes with Amazon. So it's a very similar type of situation where you're playing within Amazon sandbox primarily. So if Amazon makes adjustment, then it's going to probably have an effect on you. However, like you were talking about, if you can kind of blend that across multiple different aspects and play with, you know, different people's sandboxes to
Mm-hmm.
keep the metaphor going, then it's inevitably just going to make it a more
Mm-hmm.
attractive asset. But I mean, with that being said, we have a lot of people who are looking to acquire solely Amazon businesses because of like what you said, they have experience of ecom and kind of taking it off the market. So yeah, that's a great
Yeah,
opportunity.
and just to expand upon that, like I said, like using this business as an example, obviously, this business, what they do on Amazon, they do well, and that's
Hmm.
typical from. I mean, that's generally what you see when you look at a solely Amazon business, is that they're generally ranking high in their categories, and the opportunities outside of Amazon are there for anyone else, any potential buyer. But what they do well. So now this is going to transition us into our Q&A session section of the show. I guess session work too. But yeah, guys, go ahead, get us any questions you have. We wanna help you. And so we're gonna start here. I've got a few here. Andrew, I heard about Empire Flippers after already knowing about Flippa. What's the difference? You want to take that one, Alex?
Yeah, sure. So Flippa is a different business model than us. So Flippa is a marketplace where anyone can list. You don't need a lot of verification on the fact like that you own the asset, or definitely don't need to really verify whether the revenue or anything is correct. So there are some opportunities to potentially pick up businesses off
Mm-hmm.
of Flippa, but we hear a lot of stories from both buyers and sellers alike that more often than not, the deal isn't reflective of what they're expecting when they go into it. So you really need to do your due diligence and make sure that everything's good to go there before you move forward on any transactions. Compared with us, we are a curated and vetted marketplace. So in order to get onto our market, like we talked about, you have to go through vetting. Vetting rejects a lot of businesses, and we verify that all the information you're working on is correct. On top of that, once you purchase a business from us, like we talked about, we have that dedicated migration process to make sure that there wasn't any gross misrepresentations and that everything is good to go before we release the funds to the seller. So we help manage and migrate the process over. Whereas with Flippa, you're still directly working with the seller to make sure the transition happens.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll do an episode solely about that vetting process sometime in the future. But I guess the big
Sure.
answer really comes down to the fact that um, when you buy on Empire Flippers and when you're looking at businesses, what you see is 99% of the time what you're going to get because as Alex was talking about, we have a trained team who goes through and looks all over these businesses to make sure that they are accurately representing themselves. And then we also have our team, which then takes that information and comes up with a proper valuation, which, as Alex said before, most of our businesses are sold at 90% or higher on that listing price. So, it's clear that the valuation that we give these businesses are attractive to buyers. So
Mm-hmm.
and seem fair all around. I mean that's really the big takeaway from Empire Flippers. And speaking of what you said, going off of what you said about you've heard from buyers and sellers about Flippa, coming from David, do you survey the FBA buyers you've sold to in the past on their satisfaction, success, and average growth rates? Have we? Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So that's a really difficult metric to get. So it's something we're working on gathering more information. But basically, what it boils down to is there's no real incentive for the buyer to share information with us. So we do reach out, we do like verify everything, we ask them how it's going, but there's no real reason for them to respond and kind of open the kimono and give us
Mm-hmm.
more information unless they go to sell the business again. So that does happen a good bit. For example, we had two guys buy two businesses from us. They're partners. They bought two businesses from us. When they purchased them, I think they were worth around $40,000. They grew them and scaled them for 8 or so months, maybe 9 months, and then brought them back to the marketplace where the value was double that. So we do see a lot of repeat buyers, and I think that's kind of a testament that the process is working. But to answer your question, we do have a lot of case studies and testimonials. We have that $1.8 million case study out there. We're trying to promote and create more information around it, but ultimately, I think it's just going to take a good bit of
Mm-hmm.
time to do
It's something that we're working on, I guess, is the short
that. Yeah,
answer. We
that's
have
the
some, and there's obviously evidence in the fact that we do have a lot of recurring buyers. And we also, to that point on the opposite end, we also have a lot of recurring sellers. I've done
yep.
seller interviews with the same people multiple times. And that's a testament to how people like our process. So, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name. I feel free to post a comment and correct me. Like I really want to get every name correct. But Ujwal asks, how much more value is there to getting into new Amazon marketplaces like Europe, Asia, Japan, etc.? Also, adding a Shopify store, social media accounts, etc. Basically, the what he's asking is, I guess, kind of what we've touched on a little bit more, but a little more information about how valuable is it to expand off of Amazon US. And I guess
Sure.
I'll give my take, and then we'll toss it to Alex. And my take is, I mean, again, you got to do what you're good at. When you're building, it's your business, and if you have the Amazon US experience, use that Amazon US experience. If you don't have the Facebook experience, you know, don't try to force it. I mean, the options are either don't do it or try to learn how to do it or pay a consultant to do it. Hire someone to do the Facebook for you. But I guess at
Mhm.
the end of the day, if you have products that are selling on Amazon US, getting people, getting in front of more people is never a bad thing, as long as the process in doing so doesn't take more away from the business than you're getting back. So if you are what I mean by that is, if you're selling in the US, if shipping to Asia would be more expensive than what you'd be getting back from it, it's probably not worth it. I don't know. That's my takeaway. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty broad question,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think what you were saying, Jake, makes a lot of sense. Like you want to focus on areas where you've had previous success, or at least iterate slowly on the
Mm-hmm.
areas where you're looking to learn, so you don't like lose a
Yeah.
bunch of money. But as far as the other marketplaces goes, usually that's pretty low hanging fruit. So America is by far the most competitive marketplace. So if you're doing well in America, the EU marketplace is getting more and more competitive, but still, like from a comparison perspective, there are less people over there, but it's also a lot less
Mm-hmm.
sellers. So looking into how to transition that product over to the EU marketplace makes a lot of sense. As far as the Japanese and the Australian market, those are just younger. So yeah, I mean, there is potential opportunity there as well. I would investigate it, and like Jake said, if the numbers make sense to kind of deploy it, then I would focus some resources
Yeah,
there.
and another thing to consider when expanding into other territories is that sometimes a product that will be doing well here, just because a product is selling well in the US, doesn't mean that it's going to be a hit everywhere. You could have the
That's a good
world's best iPhone case, and if you, but maybe the colors don't match well in Japan. I don't know. I'm bad example, but you know what I mean. If just
Yeah,
because something is doing well here doesn't mean that it's doing well elsewhere, and it may. But looking if you're looking to expand into these other territories, definitely do your market research before investing the money and the
absolutely.
time into setting up the processes to get on those other marketplaces. Because the worst thing that could happen is you have a winner of a product in the US making a lot of money. You take it over to Japan, and they don't like the product, and then you lose a lot of money.
Right.
So Ujwal also asks, is it still valuable to have these multiple sales channels set up, equipping the new buyer even if they don't generate much revenue? So I'll let you take this one first.
Yeah, so that's a good question. And this is a pretty typical
Mm-hmm.
example. So, like an FBA business here that has a Shopify store, but it maybe only does 2% of revenue for the year as compared to Amazon. It is valuable. So, one, usually those are in place to help establish brand registry and trademarks. So, that's the
Mm-hmm.
first initial value and kind of helps build that step. On top of that, um, it is helpful, but you haven't really mitigated the risk. So it wouldn't be worthy to kind of like step the multiple up, but it does help us kind of build out the portfolio on the business, so that we can get closer to list price, because those options you have made it easier for the new buyer to kind of step
Mm-hmm.
into those roles. If that
Yeah,
makes
I
sense.
mean, it's what Alex said. It's definitely helpful because if let's say you may not have a ton of Shopify experience, because with setting up a Shopify account comes other skill sets needed. Unlike Amazon, where they have Amazon pay per click on that platform, that's all encompassing. With a Shopify, you need to get people to that Shopify site. It's your own website. So, I mean, that
Hmm.
takes Facebook, that takes email marketing, that takes Google AdWords, SEO work. But with that said, I mean, just because you're not super adept to handle the Shopify site doesn't mean that someone coming in isn't. So we spoke a bit earlier in the show about minimizing the work that a new owner has to do. And the more processes that you have set up, the less work a new owner has to put into getting them set up, which in turn can make the
Yeah.
business look more desirable. So, we have time for one more question here, guys, and thank you all for the questions. Jenny, how is a declining revenue trend reflected in the price multiple?
Yeah, so we do price that into the multiples. So, if you have an asset that is declining, we're going to use a multiple that's on the lower end of
Mm-hmm.
that range. So, That's typically in the cases when you're seeing multiples around 22x, 26x, depending on the business, depending on the decline. Again, it varies. So like a business that's declining 5% year over year, I mean, that's not actually a huge decline and it's probably pretty solvable. But a business that's kind of continuing that decline, then that's when we want to make an adjustment that really reflects the decline.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other to expand upon that question is what if it's an odd month? What if last September was really down because they ran out of stock?
Hmm.
How do you reflect that?
Yeah. So a month doesn't make a trend. That's a great point. So just because the business was doing $10,000 a month for 6 months and then it had a month where it did nothing, or it did $2,000, that isn't necessarily like an
Hmm.
example of a business that's in decline. It's a month that had a mess up. So overall, that average monthly net profit is going to take that into account, and the trend will still be where it is. So it could still be a very stable asset. So that's not going to affect the multiple, but that is a great opportunity for a buyer because that has brought the average monthly net profit multiple. And if you weren't going to run out of inventory, it would do nothing but just
Yeah.
benefit the business, right? So a lot
Yeah,
of
I
meat on
mean
the table.
that's what you said. It can bring it can bring the price down because you're building it off of an average. And if one month, which is an
Mm-hmm.
outlier, is bad though, that'll bring down the average, which will then bring down the
Yep.
valuation. I guess a a piece of advice that I would have in that regard though is if you're looking to sell your business, you're getting it all ready, and then something happens, whatever it is, and you do have that off month. I would recommend putting off selling for a couple months until you can show that that was not a trend. Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you always want to basically put your best
Hmm.
foot forward when you're selling, right?
Yeah,
So,
so
yeah.
actually, I take it back. We have one final question. David, for those considering starting an FBA business that you may sell later, for those considering to start an FBA business as an alternative to buying one, what resources, services, training
Mhm.
do you think we should best start with? So, I guess to really start answering this question, we got to go back to the start of the EF Live show. Our very first episode, we detailed some amazing software tools that are very beneficial, and we see a lot of our businesses using, or the businesses that we sell using to sell to grow their business. And I would definitely check out episode 1 of EF Live.
Yep,
Yeah,
sounds good.
so we got to Ujwal, you got my name right. Thanks for the feedback. Hey, thank you for being on the show. I'm very happy I got your name right, and just thanks for being here. I really appreciate it, guys. Again, we will be here every single Wednesday. Well, I will, and I'll be here every single Wednesday. I'll be on with a different EF Live team member. I'm sure Alex will be back sometime, but we'll be covering different topics. This is, I believe, our last FBA
I think
topic
so.
in the series. So next week we'll be talking about a whole new range of topics. It'll be very exciting. Check the subscribe to the newsletter to get information on what we're going to be talking about next. We'll have 4 weeks on a new topic now. I guess Alex, do you have any closing thoughts before we sign off here?
No, guys, it was fun, man. As always, looking forward to the next
Yeah,
one.
I guess that's pretty much it. This was really fun. We hope you guys enjoy the show. Again, this is your show. This is designed to teach you guys. And if you have, you know, any questions, always feel free to ask them during the show, and we'll get to them. So thank you again. Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern, every single week. And I guess, you know, have a fantastic day.
Yeah. Thanks,
Yep.
guys.